Hello, I'm the Smoking Cheddar, but you probably already knew that. So we're going to continue with our deep dive into artillery by looking at the next unit on that list, the RL. So, as always, make sure your other half is happily watching reruns of Dallas or CSI. You've got yourself a drink and some snacks, and your headphones are in, because back to back, these two artillery videos are going to start taking a long time. This is going to be no different, and as always we'll start off with the tech, we'll move on to the unit, we'll discuss the officers and scenarios in which we could use them at the end. So as always and as before, we're only ever really interested in the pictured tech. We will be looking at a couple of the other techs within this tree which are useful and worthy of note for the RL. And as always, keep those in the back of your mind as we move into the officers and into the scenarios. Okay, so the first one is off-road trucks. Reduces the load time for a rocket launcher's first reload by 1 second. Very, very handy skill. Much like the other artillery units, you also get the use of this one, God of War. When your artillery attacks, there's a 10% chance the next load time will be reduced by 40%. Now this, coupled with the -1 second, will come in extremely useful, trust me on that one, especially in field play or base defense. This one is especially useful on the RL, more so than the guns because of the length of time the second and third reloads are. So artillery load time reduction is very, very good. We have additional firepower as well, and also much like the other artillery units, anything with damage intensity on, especially in terms of fortification bonuses, is extremely useful as well. So let's have a look at the unit. What do we get at 8.1? Well, we get a 1.1 million firepower. The damage is 20k, and of course we have astonishingly low HP. But as with all artillery, what we're really interested in is the attributes box. It says here that we've got two lots of attributes. The first one is a 200% multiplier to infantry, and a second one is 350% multiplier to fortifications. Now, as you've heard me say many times before, infantry in bunkers count as fortifications. I believe this stacks, which would mean you get a 350% bonus damage versus infantry, which would track if you ever use RL against infantry in the arena, a sterile environment. You'll know fully well how dangerous an RL can be against infantry, and it's much the same in base defense against an unprepared opponent. If someone comes at you with infantry and you've got a good RL, you're going to send them back to respawn. They are not coming after you. You've got a magazine size of 12. So you can fire up to 12 rockets at 20k a shot, 8.1. So, you know, that's a fairly hefty amount of damage you can put out. Admittedly, per shot, that's actually lower than the Lib gun and the Marty gun. However, it's the extras that you can do with the RL that make it exceptionally useful as both a field and a defensive component. I mean, it's good versus bases as well if you're prepared to go down that road. Now, obviously, it wouldn't be much of a surprise to most of you that Ventura here is top of the list for the RL, and that's predominantly down to the bonuses he receives. As you can see here, he gets a 20% bonus to damage intensity, and it goes up by an additional 5% if he's in an RL. It's obviously significant because in a defensive situation when you're up against infantry, you want the highest amount of damage infantry and fortification damage possible in order to wipe out the infantry attacking you. This is also exceptionally useful at overwhelming base defense and base damage resistance. So, I mean, if you have an RL, Yes, he could deal a lot of skill damage on a Liberty gun or on a Martyr howitzer, but do consider him for the RL, much like I am.
Don't even try to get past me.
War Machine gets another honourable mention, and that's because of the 1 second load time reduction, and of course God of War, which can stack with his ability and his skill, which is also load time reduction. And it wouldn't surprise you to know that if you have him on an RL, it's exceptionally good as a field unit. If you're going in for artillery field play, War Machine is very good. He's not going to deal a lot of skill damage, but to be perfectly honest, if you can get off 1 or 2 skill shots in field play against other units, the battle's been going on for a long while, and at that point they're probably worn down enough that his skill damage of 1300 once he's awakened is probably going to be enough to finish them off. But if you combine him with Ventura, you're going to deal lots of skill damage. Lots of skill damage. And, of course, you get a lower reload time, which everyone loves with the RL. The lower that reload time, the more damage you can deal. Eye of Providence. Now, this is because of his bonuses towards fortifications, and obviously if you're going to deal fortification damage, you're going to want as much fortification bonuses to stack on top of each other as possible, and Eye of Providence is always at the top of that list. He gives exceptionally good options for offense, and his skill damage, once it's boosted, very, very deadly. Now, I'm hesitant to add Argent Flame to this list. The predominant reason is because he should be in everyone's list for the 25% bonus. It doesn't matter if it's an ATG, it doesn't matter if it's a howitzer, it doesn't matter if it's an RL. If you have at least one artillery unit, which you should have at least one, he should be on your list. And he should always be considered. I think that goes without saying. He is just a staple officer for any artillery corps or for any artillery player or unit. And Lady of Justice gets a mention again as well. This is predominantly down to the field play aspect of things. We get bonus firepower, we're getting a critical strike chance, but we're getting a movement speed, we're getting a damage intensity buff, both of which we can use. We're also gaining enemy troop speed reduction, which, when they're trying to get away from you and you're using an RL, is very handy indeed. Now, in the event of field play, I probably would suggest War Machine and Lady of Justice. The reason being is that with Lady of Justice, we're getting a 15% critical strike chance, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you start adding up all of the potential chances for things that can go off, we've got a 10% chance of a load time reduction of 40%. We've now got a 15% chance of a critical strike, which is 150% of base damage. We're starting to see a very good pattern here. Now, also, War Machine and Lady of Justice both have damage intensity, which is exceptionally useful when overwhelming another unit in the field, because we're applying damage intensity at a higher rate than their damage resistance, and then thus able to deal more damage with the initial shot. It's important to note that it's not really ideal with these two officers as a setup to be sitting around and trying to get off a skill shot. That's not the idea. The idea is to run up to them, drop that 2-second artillery, and then run away before they can engage you. And if you can successfully pull this off and you can disengage from combat, you can then re-engage into combat. Not only that, if you're successful with the initial shot and then you kill that unit, you can then target another unit and then reset the load time from there. So there's other methods you can use to reset the load time, not just simply disengaging from combat and then re-engaging. Literally just kill the unit you're shooting at and then move on to the next one. Now, if you kill the unit you're shooting at and you move on to the next one immediately, your skill timer is going to tick down from 8 seconds for that initial load. And this is where I would recommend War Machine goes first, because then you get an additional 20%, I believe, load time reduction from his tactical skill. Let's double check that. Where is he? There he is.
Don't even try to get past me.
10%, not 20%. You do get a additional 10% load time reduction once this has popped off. So out in the field, what we've done is we've sacrificed range for effectively load time here. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say it's probably better if you run an Antonia Champion of the People. I would disagree. I would say the load time reduction is way more valuable in this instance on the basis of the tech. It is personal preference. You can obviously do as you wish. I've ran War Machine alongside Warrior Wiz on the RL, and I can tell you as a field unit, it's exceptionally dangerous. Exceptionally dangerous. The critical strike with Warrior Wiz was only 10%, I believe, but that was still popping off. We've got load time reduction. We had a firepower debuff that was applied by Warrior Wiz as well, and also we had a damage resistance debuff that was also applied by Warrior Wiz. So if they managed to survive the first 2 salvos and the skill, they wouldn't last much longer than that. So how would you use this? It's ideal for popping out and sniping units driving past your base. It's ideal for dropping in behind enemy lines, picking off enemy tank columns, picking off enemy AGs, especially if they're not paying attention. The downside is that the RL is extremely squishy, guys. If it does get caught out in the open, you will get punished for it. But if you do get good with it, and you get a little bit of practice in under your belt, you can snipe units a lot harder than you would do with artillery, because you're not relying on that initial charge of loading the gun. You're not needing to use a NPC unit, a Raven unit, to reduce your initial load time. So that would be my suggestion. Defensively, you could park Argent Flame once he's awakened with War Machine. The extra 25% in skill damage that Argent Flame applies to the aid would easily then bump the pair up to the 3k mark for a total skill damage output, while you're also getting a load time reduction, which will then stack with obviously the tech and obviously the potential chance to then get a further load time reduction should the attacking unit survive the first volley of attacks out of your base, or the second unit. And it's also worth noting that in a defensive situation, if you can get War Machine's tactical skill off, then that 10% load time reduction is getting applied to the next load. So if a target is killed and the load time is reset, and then you apply all of the load time bonuses, that's also getting applied, which means your load time suddenly goes from like 2 seconds to like 1.7 seconds. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it can be. It can make a hell of a difference. Defensively, Stinger Fist is always worth a shout as well. And again, much like the last video, it's simply for preemptive attack to reduce the shield efficiency of the attacking unit by 25%. The RL has the biggest advantage here, being able to drop off the first unit in 2 seconds. But not only that, we're getting an additional 25% skill damage on the 1800, and we're getting an additional 25% damage on the splash damage of 600 co-efficiency, and you're also getting another 25% when this officer is garrisoned. So that's a hell of a lot of additional bonus damage to be able to produce with the RL. Admittedly, this is skill damage, not unit damage, and with the RL, the skill damage is actually a little bit lower, because the initial damage that the RL can produce is lower than the artillery. But if you stack the other buffs correctly that you're training in, you can bring that up to on par and in some cases exceed howitzers for both skill damage and unit damage capabilities in a defensive role. Because don't forget guys, in the tech tree there are lots of garrison damage buffs available, and if you start learning these skills on top of what you're doing, it's a very, very, very deadly combo. Now, you could use, much as before, Argent Flame, Venturer, or Argent Flame I, or I and Venturer, depending on your availability of Argent Flame. Obviously, if you have an ATG, you might decide that Argent Flame is better off there, or if you have a Howitzer, you might decide that Argent Flame is better off there. At this point, I'd probably suggest, and this is my suggestion only, is that if you are looking to deal as much siege damage as possible to a base, that would be to use Venturer as the that would be to use Eye of Providence as the captain and Venturer as the aide, as both officers get a 32% damage intensity bonus versus fortifications. His is called HE.
I spy with my little eye.
And his is called Precision Guided. But we also get increases the skill boost of this officer's troop against hostile bases by 40%. So the skill damage against an enemy base is really ramped up. Now, you could use Argent Flame in conjunction with Eye of Providence and really see a massive escalation there, but personally I would suggest at that point you put Argent Flame on another gun and potentially use Eye of Providence and Venturer. It'll be a slow load, it'll be a slow slog, but what you lose in load time and abilities you'll be gaining in damage intensity bonuses versus defending base. And as a defensive unit, it will just hit so hard. Like, you can, okay, you're not going to get a bunch of extra bonuses, but this thing will hit like a goddamn truck in the defense. Like, mark my words. The RL is as damaging as it is weak. It's very vulnerable, it moves quickly, and if you have that load time reduction, it really isn't to be messed with. Out of all of the artillery pieces, it's probably the most versatile. You can do the most with this thing. Unfortunately, when it comes up against super heavies, it just doesn't stand on two legs. However, if you only have space for two artillery pieces, if you were to pair this with an ATG, then defensively you could probably get away with stacking absolutely everything else into tanks or tanks and infantry. Not really worry too much about your artillery, providing you've got enough defensive officers available and obviously you're doing what you want to do with the artillery. I must be honest, I am a bit of a fan of the RL. I have used all of the artillery pieces, and out of all of the artillery pieces, this one is pretty much my favourite. It really is. You see, if you're attacking an enemy base and you've got 2 or 3 of these available and you see the skill damage pop off, the enemy knows about it. The bonuses that you get from the attack versus fortifications, the enemy knows about it. If this thing comes knocking, you can crush out bunkers like no tomorrow. And personally, if I had a Martyr howitzer, personally, I would bin that off and just take one of these. it's going to deal more damage defensively. It's going to have better maneuverability. As a donor unit to AGs, it will get there faster. It will deal just as much damage. It's easier to maneuver on the battlefield. It's way better as a sniping unit than any other unit because of its low load time. You can drive it up to enemies as they're passing you. You can drop that load time reduction on the first unit and just plink it off as it's driving past your base. They won't even know. I've done it loads of times. They won't even know. And it's just fun. It's just a fun unit. I don't like the skin. I don't like the base skin. The actual additional skins that you get for it, some of them are okay. Some of them are a bit iffy. But I do like the RL. Probably more than what I should have. Anyway, this one didn't actually go on as long as I thought it was going to go on for. So, thank you for watching. As always, there will be a link in the description down below. This time it will hopefully work to the Discord. Now, we're all adults. If you join the Discord, there is a bit of degeneracy that goes on in there. Just keep it within the rules, guys. If you see me in voice chat, you're more than welcome to come and talk to me in voice chat. And remember, as always, if you don't donate a pizza to the rules do not let you continue. I do love the RL, it is very cheeky. It forever fills me with glee that I can do this. Oh, that's not even with maxed out officers. That's so much fun.